Welcome to Tuesday. You know, tomorrow, not today, but tomorrow is National Tequila Day. But just in case you were thinking of starting your celebration early, trust me and hold off on that. We're going to be digging into energy codes today, and believe me when I say you need to be sober to keep all this stuff straight. But I'll give you a little secret. The drinking starts when the hearings conclude, so just wait. In all seriousness, though, I have to say that the Green Building Media has a knack for timing on these code-related webinars, because the deadline to submit public comments for the 2021 IECC is tomorrow. So we brought in not one, but two experts to talk about this most pressing topic. Here today is Shaunna Mozingo and Jim Meyers, and if you are a regular attendee of these webinars, you know that they are repeat guests. Now, I'll talk about their backgrounds in a minute, but the focus of our webinar today will be the residential and commercial energy codes. They're going to give us some insight into the code development hearings from late April, as well as a forecast of what we might see at the public comment hearings in late October. Now let's meet today's expert guests. Shaunna Mozingo is the president of the Mozingo Code Group, LLC. In addition to being a plans analyst and inspector for a jurisdiction, Shaunna has provided code adoption assistance to many jurisdictions and a whole host of other research and training services on energy code topics. She has been awarded the Department of Energy's prestigious Jeffrey A. Johnson Award for excellence in the advancement of building energy codes and performance. Shaunna is a past president of the Colorado chapter of IECC and serves on the chapter's education, legislative, code development, and membership committees. She was appointed to the ICC's Commercial Energy Code Development Committee and Code Correlation Committee for both the 2018 and the 2021 code cycles. So she's a great person to talk to about commercial codes. That's why we've got her on here today. Her latest accomplishment has been co-authoring the book titled 2018 Energy Codes Essentials, and that book is being written for the International Code Council. Jim Meyers is a Senior Associate Director of Buildings Efficiency Program at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Partnership, which is affectionately known as SWEEP. He works on increasing energy efficiency in buildings, and he's also responsible for leading the buildings programs, including adoption of newer energy codes and standards, going beyond code with green building programs, and collaborating with stakeholders to increase efficiency in the built environment. Now, Jim also actively participates in International Code Council committees, including the 2021 Residential IECC Committee. If you watched the webcast at all, you saw these people on screen. He is a board member of the Energy Efficiency Business Coalition, which is a nonprofit trade association that represents energy efficiency businesses. And he earned his engineering degree from San Jose State University and is a lead green associate and certified green professional. Now, before we get started, I need to tell you about PowerShift from our friends at NV Energy. You can never save too much energy or money, and that's why NV Energy has introduced PowerShift to help its residential and business customers conserve even more energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift by NV Energy is also about providing you with excellent customer service. It's your one-stop shop to find all the energy-efficient products and services to help you boost your bottom line, along with convenient ways to manage your account. PowerShift Energy Advisors are dedicated to working side by side with business customers to discuss their needs and to find energy efficiency solutions that save money. Plus, their Business Solutions Center is the place to go to discuss your bill payments and account-related questions. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. Now, during the course of today's presentation, you can submit questions for our guests. Simply use that questions box that's probably on the right side of your screen. Now, here's how we're going to do questions today. Jim is going to talk about the residential energy code, and then we'll hold a brief Q&A. Shaunna will then talk about the commercial energy code, and then we'll have a Q&A about commercial, and then we'll start to filter in residential questions that might remain. So Jim, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. Jim Meyers here with SWEEP. Welcome everybody to the webinar. And I will jump in and start on the residential provisions. And so on a first look, these code hearings took place in April. The residential hearings late April 28th through May 3rd. And we had approximately 600 proposals that we reviewed and discussed over those 6+ days. Participants from Alaska, these were the ones, individuals I caught, Alaska, Hawaii, and then the continental US were present and testifying and participating. And then the themes, there were some themes that I saw for the code hearings and proposals, and then new items. We'll go through that. So here's just a picture of the all the code proposals that we saw. It doesn't look like much right there, but some of those proposals took hours and hours to discuss. And even some of those proposals were very simple. It seemed like they were very simple, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, and they took an hour or multiple hours as the committee reviewed and heard, and the proponents and opponents discussed. So themes: clean up and clarify. There was going to be some, the codes continue to improve, clean up, clarify, so that compliance can improve. Trade-offs and adoptions. There's been trade-offs in the codes before those proposals come up. ERI, think HERS, ResNet, that there was a number of proposals there. Leakage, when I talk about leakage, it was air leakage, and duct leakage was of importance and discussion. Power, energy, and efficiency, that had to do with electrification, renewable energy. Zero, discussion about zero energy, and then some new technologies and capabilities that are happening in buildings. So for the efficiency improvements, very moderate, not much in, we didn't see the massive jump like we saw before in the 2009 to 2012. So very moderate in improvements that came out of the committee. The committee also said no to any major rollbacks in efficiency. And as I looked through the voting, it was 60-40 percentage, 70-30 percentage, a lot of the votes. There were some blowouts, so the committee had 11 members. But for the votes that passed, it was pretty much 60-40 as they passed the committee. So clarifying, if you can think and you look at the upper table, you've got a plus there. So the plus, and that's been in the code for a while, where it's talking about cavity insulation plus a continuous insulation. A proposal came through, changed it to an and you can see it circled in the bottom. They also added CI for continuous insulation to clarify. It's been in the code for a number of years, but the committee agreed with the proponent that this should be in place. Also, I wanted to explain where you see the, in parentheses, RE28. That means that's the proposal, residential energy number 28, and it was approved. If it was disapproved, I put a D, and I will be discussing some disapproved proposals because, as Mike mentioned, there's public comments that are due tomorrow. Those proposals that were disapproved could be approved in the following process, and I'll have a schedule in the last few slides for you. So compliance certificate. Oh, there's a compliance certificate. So you think about that in the energy code. A lot of discussion about what should be on the compliance certificate. Should additional information come on to the compliance certificate? Some were approved, many were not. If you look at the what I call the solar tubes on the side, the tubular daylighting devices, those have always been questionable. How do you qualify that? How does that fit into the energy code? So TDD was added to the definition, and that should help in clarification and for compliance of when a home has that product included. Air barrier and insulation table, we've seen that for years. We had many, many hours discussion, many proposals on that. Some were approved, many were not. And then document compliance path. This was, there was a few proposals that came in, actually 2 were passed. This is the one that I liked, where it said, so the plans are submitted to the building department. The plans also have to specify which compliance pathway is going to be chosen. So is it the prescriptive path? Is it the trade-off using a res check, the performance, or the ERI path? Because now it's not there. This is another one that's interesting. Is if you've looked at the code over the years, you've seen these titles: prescriptive, mandatory. What do they really mean? There's been confusion. Why is this requirement not mandatory? Why is this requirement prescriptive, and so forth? So the Sustainability and Energy High Performance Code Action Committee, called the SHGC, deliberated over this for a couple years and looked at it. So they've said the labels are not enforceable, and it was their understanding that mandatory was meant to intend non-tradable when using a performance compliance option, okay? Where if it was prescriptive, it meant mandatory when using the prescriptive path, but tradable when using the performance path. So now what they've done is they created tables, same thing on commercial. And here's an example. So there's a table, and this table here is 406.2, that's the ERI path. There's another comparable table for the performance pathway, which is section R405. And so that does, you're going to follow all the requirements of that pathway. And by the way, these are also other mandatory requirements, other sections of the code that you have to comply with when using this other pathway. Other efficiency requirements, there were some minor window improvements in the colder climates. Fenestration, there were increased fenestration U factors, or I should say decreased fenestration U factors, which were disapproved. And then here's another one that was interesting: hot water, compactness of hot water, submitted by Gary Klein, who submitted many plumbing code change proposals over the years for hot water systems. And it only applies to the performance path. The reason it only applies to the performance path is because the ERI, think of HERS, ResNet, they already have hot water requirements within that ERI pathway. So this is looking at the compactness, the size of the area where hot water pipes will be will reside in the house compared to the overall size of the house. It comes up with a ratio, and then it comes up with this factor, and this would go into the software. Now, remember that the software, well, the software companies that develop software for the performance path also develop software for the ERI pathway. So again, they already have a similar path for hot water distribution and savings in the ERI pathway. So this was approved by the committee. There wasn't a lot of pushback on that one that I remember. This is a new one, a new optional pathway. This was approved by the committee. This is different, where it's just looking at the cooling loads and the heating loads for a climate zone based on the square foot. And there are no backstops. There's not an R value or a U factor backstop. There's not an IECC version backstop. And so this is truly a performance pathway. Questions and concerns about this: is it equivalent? The proponents, of which Building Science Corporation was a supporter of this, and they did have some analysis review by PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, on this. It is operating right now in Aspen. Aspen, Colorado has this within their code instead of the other performance pathway. Other areas, trade-offs and options. Mechanical equipment trade-offs, there were a few proposals for that. None of those passed. The mechanical equipment trade-offs came out of the Energy Code in the 2009 Energy Code. Since that time, I'd have to say every code cycle there have been proposals to add back in the equipment trade-offs in the performance pathway. Each year they have not passed. There's a zero cavity option. I'll show you that. That passed, RE27. And so you can put all the insulation on the exterior, none on the interior. So that's one that passed. Another one that passed is wood frame walls. If you are 24-inch on centers, OVE, that you could, this proposal was submitted by the National Association of Home Builders, said it could be an R18. So if you go on to, well, let me go back up. You could go to an R18. I didn't vote for this. Reason I didn't vote for it because when the R20 came into the code back in 2009, there was confusion. What's an R20? You can't buy an R20 bat. You couldn't back then. Now you can. Some manufacturers are manufacturing R20 bat. And there's not really an R18 bat out there. There's R19s, and when they get compressed, each manufacturer has a different R value, and some are 17.5, 17.6, whatever it may be. You'd have to check with the manufacturer. So that was my confusion, but it did pass. And this is for 24-inch on centers. It wouldn't be for typical 16-inch on centers. And then points-based systems, numerous point-based systems to add flexibility to get communities down to 0. What I'm showing here in trade-offs and options is here was the 0. As I showed the cavity, here's a 0 plus 15, so 0 cavity, 15 exterior. This proposal was also approved also as a cavity only. So if you go to the bottom of this table, those are the very cold climates. So there's a 30 cavity only option, of which you're not going to be building that in a 2x6, but that's there in addition to a 0 cavity and exterior insulation only option. And then there's a 24-inch on center, and then I will show a table. This is a table, a proposal. I believe this was by the Leading Builders of America that proposed options where there would be credit. So you increase your attic insulation, your walls, your windows, and so forth, and you get credit, and you have to get X number of points. There were 3 proposals that had this type of option. None of them passed. This was the Energy Efficient Codes Coalition proposal. So some similarity, points were different, credits are different, but the other organization, NBI, also had one that would provide flexibility for builders. Okay, so on this, on the ERI, and I'm watching my time, Mike. So on ERI, what is stated right now in the ERI is it says if you use the ERI pathway, you have to have a backstop, and it says here's your backstop. Your backstop is the 2009 IECC. And so here's the example. It says here, if you're going to use the ERI pathway, you have your mandatory requirements, and also your thermal envelope has to at least meet the 2009 IECC. This proposal was submitted by the National Association of Home Builders, and what this did is it said your UA proposed design based on the 2021 code, and then you multiply it by 1.15, so it's taking that 15% reduction, which is approximately what the difference between the 9 and the 18 has been, and potentially the 2021. And so this is strictly a UA proposed versus a firm code requirement. The reason that the home builders propose this is because some climates, they don't have as much of a trade-off in some of their components, the building components. So this would allow additional opportunity for them to use the UA path as a backstop instead of the code. And the opponents came up with a floor modification, and this added in the solar heat gain coefficient requirements, and then it was approved. So the committee approved it. The opponents came together on this proposal together. Other on the ERI is documenting the ERI compliance at the permit and certificate of occupancy. So there's been questions and concerns about how does the ERI apply? Does it only need to apply at certificate of occupancy, or where? There was a proposal for ERI to reduce the ERI scores and include renewables. So take the scores lower, make that building more efficient, but then allow renewables. That wasn't that wasn't passed. And I believe those ERI scores lined up with the original ERI proposed scores, and actually came into the 2015 scores. And then the zero energy appendix was disapproved, which used the ERI pathway. So on a leakage, this was so there was air leakage and duct leakage. And so on air leakage, there's always been this question of how do you do air leakage testing on attached units, small homes, multifamily, and so forth. And so this proposal was submitted. There are some municipalities across the US are already changing the air leakage requirements for multifamily and attached units because of challenges of getting that ACH level because of the common walls, because of the volume. There's not enough volume in there to be effective for the ACH, the air change per hour. And so this will apply, this RE88 would apply to multifamily, would apply to attached multifamily row homes, and then also small homes. So, and the way it's written is homes less than or equal to 1,500 square feet. So as we're seeing homes, smaller homes being constructed and more attached units, this is the pathway that could be used. It would be an air leakage rate of 0.30 CFM per square foot. And that's looking at the enclosure area, it's not looking at the volume. And raters, energy raters were advocates of that. So for duct leakage, in the code, the way it's written today, duct leakage testing only is required if you're outside conditioned space. In the 2021, it was approved by the committee. Duct leakage testing would be required with ducts within the building envelope. So that's to be aware. And then maximum 8.0 CFM, that's for the those compliance paths. So if you think of performance path and ERI path, there's a limit. There's a limit now of 8 CFM, which is fairly leaky. I think you all understand. So that was included and approved. Duct leakage testing to outside, duct leakage testing to outdoors was approved. That's been discussed the last few code cycles because it's just been total duct leakage test. And so that's a new opportunity for raters that are doing that. So on power, energy, and efficiency, there was a lot of discussion about the intent of the code. Should it include renewables? Because the intent of the code today says conservation of energy over the useful life of each building. And so there was a lot of discussion. Should it be just conservation? Should it include energy production? Should it include energy benefits? A number of proposals. Many of those were disapproved. There was also a proposal for limiting the amount of renewable energy production when there's a renewable portfolio standard in a state. So we're seeing many states that are requiring the utilities to have X% of their power generated by renewables. So that was also disapproved. So we're seeing we didn't see this 10 years ago, 9 years ago, but we're seeing it now as the market's changing, as the world's changing around us, there's that question, and I think it will continue to arise in the 2024 code proposals. So on the compliance certificate, there's a requirement there. If you have renewable energy in your pathway, if you're using the ERI pathway, you have to include the size of your system, your array that was used to show compliance. There's a solar PV appendix that was approved. It would be Appendix RB if it goes through all the remaining code committee requirements. And that it doesn't change any backstops or any other requirements. It just says if a municipality is going to adopt and make mandatory solar PV, here are the items that you should and you need to include with your code adoption. So that was approved as an appendix. Renewable energy credits, there were proposals to have that requirement into the code. A lot of discussion about that. Should that really reside in the building department's hands? And how appropriate is it? So I know that's discussion. I just had a discussion on this in a city yesterday that's looking on RECs. How do they account for that? And then this was the other one that was disapproved. I mentioned on-site renewable energy is a reduction in energy use. That was disapproved by the committee, and there's a renewable energy certificate. Okay, so I'm finishing up now. So on power energy efficiency, electric readiness, there was a proposal that was disapproved. What it says is if you have a gas appliance, gas range, gas dryer, gas cooktop, you also have to have a ready circuit, an electric ready circuit there. That did not pass. Lighting controls in residential didn't pass. That could come back, and that's why I'm sharing this again. High efficacy lighting, increasing that. That did not pass. Exterior lighting controls did pass. And you say, wow, exterior lighting controls for residential? In this case, it would probably mostly apply to multifamily. If you think 3 stories or less multifamily, that's where it's going to apply. There's a limit on the amount of watts. So you exceed that watts and you have exterior lighting controls that would come into play. And then zero energy was discussed. The zero energy appendix RB was proposed. That was disapproved. ASHRAE, the 90.2 was proposed as an appendix for a stretch code. They have lower ERI scores there that are all cost-effective per the ASHRAE requirements, cost-effectiveness requirements, and then the points-based systems that I showed previously. New requirements in tech, there's EV infrastructure requirements that were proposed for commercial and residential. Shaunna could talk about commercial, but on residential, it was disapproved, which would have EV readiness and EV capable parking spaces for residential. And this is just an example. If you look at the lower left, the number of EEI, Edison Electric Institute, this came from one of their reports, shows that by 2030, 78% of all EV charging infrastructure will happen at the home with 7.5 million ports that they're anticipating by 2030. So we're just a little over 10 years away from that. And then as we see Toyota here, we see GM, Ford, and so forth. We're all saying they're going all electric. There are a number of vehicles that are coming out by the time this code comes out and will be adopted. These manufacturers are going to have many EVs on the road from where we're at today. So that's just a few years down the road. And lastly, connected thermostats. That was proposed. Austin Energy is one municipality that has this in there within their code, and it allows them to support the needs of the network, and network being the grid, the utility network, and then also provides flexibility for residents. So next steps, Shaunna, I'm going into your talk for a few minutes. So here's the next step, public comments, September 23rd, governments. The next voting is only government voting representatives. And then October 23rd through the 30th, everybody come down to Las Vegas and have a party at the ICC public comment hearings. And then November, latter part of the month, there'll be the online vote by governmental voting members. And what happens there, that's what will be final in the 2021 code. So I appreciate your time. Thanks. I went over 5 minutes. Mike, thank you so much, everyone.
It's okay, Jim. Encourage the audience to go ahead and send in their questions. We're going to get to a couple of them now, and then I'll get back to the rest of them after we hear about the commercial code from Shaunna. The 2 questions I'm going to get to right now, Jim, we got a question from our friend Jack Armstrong over at SIPA. He wanted to know, what is the TDD comment for the solar tubes?
Yeah, so that's a definition. So I don't have it in front of me, but I can, here's my Jack, here's my email. Send me it, and I can send you that proposal and that definition. But there's always been a question: does that fit? Is it a skylight? Where does it fit in fenestration? And so, tubular daylighting devices have become popular in homes, as everybody's aware. And this was heartily supported by the committee and other proponents.
Okay. So Jack, we were hoping that you follow up with Jim. Also, the next question I've got is from Thomas. He wants to know, is that 8.0 CFM for ducts, is that at 50 or 25 pascals? Which one's it at?
That's ducts. So that's at 25, right?
I believe so, but he sent in right as you were talking about in your.
Yeah, it hasn't changed. It's not changing any. It's just limiting the amount of CFM.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you, Jim, and we'll bring you back when we have more questions after we get Shaunna on here. So, Shaunna, we want to go ahead and switch over to your presentation on the commercial energy code proposals.
Okay.
That were heard, and this hearing took place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and as Jim mentioned, the next round will be in Clark County. I'm using air quotes there. It's really Las Vegas.
All right. Can you see my slides pretty good?
We can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what passed and maybe a couple that didn't pass, but that I know are coming back. So some major things that we're looking at was a revision in climate zones that was put in, some restructuring, of course, better envelope provisions, whether it's the opaque envelope or the windows, new requirements for envelope verification in commercial buildings through testing and commissioning of the air barriers, a more efficient service water heating, some lighting controls, new controlled receptacle requirements that people are familiar with in ASHRAE 90.1, a new points option instead of the regular C406 additional efficiency package options that went to a points system, or at least is a proposal, energy monitoring for systems in buildings of certain sizes, some new things dealing with renewables, EV ready, and some actually optional paths of compliance in the code that we're getting ready to see. So first we'll look at ASHRAE 90.1, had some new climate zones that went in a couple of cycles ago. It didn't make it into the 2018 as it had been proposed, but it did make it in finally into the 2021 so that ASHRAE and IECC would have the exact same climate zones. There are a few differences in the climate zones. It was really, there's some addition of a climate zone 0, and there's some readjustments of things as the planet warms up. The climate zones have to change a little bit, so you'll see some changes there. But at least now IECC and ASHRAE will be the same. As Jim mentioned, the SEPCAT committee went through and did a big, huge sweep of taking out that word mandatory that you see in the code that's in parentheses, and because it was confusing. Isn't the whole code mandatory, right? And so they, instead of seeing the words, prescriptive, performance, mandatory, you'll see prescriptive and performance, and then you'll see all of the requirements are still there. Everything that used to say mandatory is still there. It's just located in those performance paths so that you can't trade out of these types of things. You always had to do them in prescriptive. It was just when you used a trade-off path, maybe you could get people were confusing what they could trade out of and not. So they put this all in a table. So you'll see that just like as in residential. There's definitely some better opaque envelope provisions. This is what you see in front of you. I put the code change proposals on here at the bottom so that you could see if you wanted to go to the monograph and actually review the proposals, which ones made these changes. But there were several changes to change. The below grade wall insulation went to an R10 instead of a 7.5 in many climate zones. There was an increase on the mass walls, and for the slab insulation in many climate zones increased. So you'll see some changes there that passed, and also for the U factors of windows. A really big change was these U factors, which was really needed because if you think about a commercial multifamily building especially, and if they're 3 stories or less, they have to have a point, like in my climate zone 5, you'd have to have a 0.30 to a 0.32, depending on which code edition you're on, of a window. But if it was commercial, 4 stories or more, you could have a 0.38 to a 0.45. And so why the difference? The window doesn't know whether it's in 3 stories or 4. And so just kind of cranking that down to make it more in line with what it should be, and same for whether it's operable, fixed, or entrance doors. So those really got brought down to being more in line. I did a lot of research before these went in to make sure that these windows were available and weren't going to be this huge increase in cost, and they all seem to be pretty in line with what's already being sold out there. All right, sorry. SHGC, you're going to see a crank down in solar heat gain coefficient numbers. There was a lot exhaustive studies done on bringing those numbers down. What is a good solar heat gain number across different climate zones? You know, we've always, in our heating dominated climate zones, not really worried about that solar heat gain coefficient as much as, say, the air conditioning climate zones like Florida and Puerto Rico and those, you know, but they're finding more and more that it really does make a difference. The more heat you let get into a commercial building, the more that air conditioner has to run to offset that heat. So you'll see a reduction in all those solar heat gains just about across the board. The envelope, so this came in, sorry, I'm getting notifications. This envelope, the blower door test required. I shut off my emails, so I don't know where those come in. Blower door test required for certain commercial buildings. It's not all, you know, it's certain sizes, but you're going to start seeing it coming in. They tried to get it into the 15, it didn't pass. They revamped the whole proposal, and it actually passed to get blower door requirements for certain commercial buildings. And then those, and then all buildings pretty much, unless you're in a climate zone that doesn't require air barriers, all air barriers have to get verified by a third party or an approved agency. And so you're going to have air barrier commissioning, which is basically going out there and making sure it was installed everywhere that it was supposed to be installed. And then also a requirement for some buildings to also get a blower door test. So that's quite new for commercial buildings that people are going to have to get used to. More efficient lighting. So dwelling units, lighting efficiency really increased. We reduced, you know, it didn't, like Jim said, didn't pass for residential, but it did pass for commercial to reduce from 65 lumens per watt to 45 lumens per watt for dwelling units. And then, of course, reducing, as we do in every code cycle, reducing the efficacies, reducing those lighting power densities and using the building area method or the space by space method. Just about everything across the board got reduced. I saw a report out by MBI not too long ago that showed that they estimated the lighting reductions alone to be about a 5% reduction. So that's a pretty good jump. And it includes exterior lighting as well, also received a good dose of reality. The code hadn't caught up with the technologies, and so buildings were passing very easily. I hadn't seen a exterior lighting comm check pass less than by 50% in some time, just because the technology is better than the code. So see some reductions there. You see this thing, you know, this came out a couple cycles ago as we start dealing with grow facilities and what kind of lights they use, and the code has always been silent on what kind of light or on actually the requirements for plant growth, lighting for plant growth. It's been silent on it. And so now with more and more plant growth lighting for grow facilities, whether medicinal or recreational marijuana, or you have a lot of restaurants that are trying to really buy food that's grown locally, and there's this big push for more locally grown. So you're starting to see these facilities pop up everywhere using lights, and so it's really contributing to the energy use in commercial buildings. So there's some new requirements there that let you know that it's about micro what is it, micromule for joules that are for plant growth, and we're going to regulate those and not the lumens, because lumens are for humans. That's what we use for visual, to see better, and so there's some efficacy requirements coming in for lighting for plant growth, which is probably long overdue. This is one, you either love it or you hate it. It's controlled receptacles. This has been in ASHRAE 90.1 for a few cycles as a mandatory requirement. I know Eric Michael has been trying to get this in the code for a long time. NEMA got it in the code this cycle to say that 50% of the receptacles in enclosed offices, conference rooms, break rooms, classrooms, and those types of spaces have to be controlled, either with split controlled receptacles or at least a controlled receptacle within 12 feet of any uncontrolled receptacle, so that things get shut off when they are not needed. It passed hesitantly. I know there's proposals to get it taken out, and and so it'll be another fun battle in Las Vegas. This is another one that MBI put in. Well, several people have put in. It's a points-based option. It's taking C406, those additional efficiency package options. And the argument has been, well, maybe the reduced power lighting option doesn't offer the same energy results as a efficient mechanical system. How can you say you get to choose either or? Are they the same? And so what this did was convert it all to a points-based system. So certain options, based on a huge study that was done, certain options get more points, so you have to get a certain amount of points. And so you might have to choose a couple options. You might get away with one option, just depending. But this opens it up to add as many options as we go. There's several proposals in here. Some passed, some didn't. I heard from the proponent yesterday that they are putting in a public comment to clean it up because they found some unintended consequences as they were going through and listening to all of the things that passed and didn't pass. So this is definitely coming back. It does add a few pages to the code book, definitely, because this table of all these points, and it's split up by climate zone and things. So all of these points are going to take up a few pages, and it's a simple concept. Whether or not people will find it simple, we'll see at the next hearing. Energy monitoring, again, something been in ASHRAE 90.1 for some time as a mandatory requirement, has never been into the energy code or to the IECC being brought in. This is to say buildings over 25,000 square feet need to have an energy monitoring system. You have to be able to have the system. It has to actually do its job. So you have to monitor, record, report. And there's some exception for tenant spaces as long as they're on their own utility service and are less than 5,000 square feet of conditioned space. But so this is a proposal that's coming in and will definitely be heard again in Las Vegas. Took a few hours to hear that one. Load shifting is a proposal that didn't pass right away, but I believe will come back. This is just adding verbiage to the intent of the code. There's a lot of proposals adding intent, but that this as verbiage that the shift of a load from on-peak period to off-peak has to be considered as an effective use of energy. And so this was from Sharon Bonesteel, and the committee was a little torn about it, but they gave her some recommendations, so I know that this will come back. There's also some things in there about intent for renewables. Renewable energy systems and storage systems should be included in the intent. It's becoming, critical to integrate energy efficiency measures and renewable measures for future codes. So how do we do that? This one, again, another one that just approved, but the committee gave strong recommendations on how to bring it back. There was more things about renewables this time in energy storage than ever before, but it's so new that it's not new, but it's new to the code committees and the codes, the IECC anyway, that it's really hard to get it through the first go around or the second go around. And kudos to Joe Kane and all of those that keep bringing it back. Something will get in there eventually. Renewable energy systems are a form of energy production in building energy use. This is what was told by the proponent of this one. You know that production is a form. Production is out there. It's not a form of use. Sorry, it's not a form of use. So the intent of the code needs to be updated, that we regulate the conservation and the production and the storage of energy, not just the conservation. So we'll see. This one did pass. Kind of, it had a few modifications to it, but it did pass. I would imagine it will also be heard again. Joe Kane also brought an appendix that was very lengthy and it was very involved, and it was, you know, probably overdue. It was an appendix that requires commercial buildings to have PV, solar, and it's for those jurisdictions that want to require that. Here's a way to do that. We've never had that in the code. How do we do that? Everybody shouldn't reinvent the wheel. You know, Title 24 has been out there for a while. People have been doing it for a while. Let's learn from them. And so this very involved, well-written appendix that Joe Kane brought in. The committee considered it very heavily for hours and just determined that there were some changes that needed to be made. But we did tell Joe, please bring it back. We need you to bring it back. People are asking for this. People are needing this. Please bring it back, and gave some specifics on how to bring that back. So I'm sure we will be hearing that. EV ready, Jim mentioned this, EV ready versus EV capable. This is really about, so EV capable is basically, you know, you have the conduit and a breaker space. EV ready is like a conduit, a breaker space, the overcurrent protection, the outlets. I mean, it's a little bit more involved. And so this is one we're going to hear again in Las Vegas. And much needed. And then a new option that got proposed for the code. It didn't pass. I know it'll come back in Las Vegas. It's this ZEPI. You know, ZEPI, if you've been around the IECC commercial projects process for very long, you're used to seeing ZEPI. ZEPI is a points-based kind of scale system, like almost like an ERI, or it's a score of 100 to 0, with 0 being closer to zero net energy. Some jurisdictions want a path to get to net zero or close to it, and so they proposed this as an appendix, or as an option. Excuse me, as an option, not an appendix. It was an actual code section C408 in the code section as a way to get there. The hassle is not everybody agrees with ZEPI, or different versions of ZEPI do different things, and so ZEPI has been in the IGCC. 2018, it's been in ASHRAE 189, and since ASHRAE 189 is now taking over most of the IGCC, it will be in the 2018 IGCC, but it's never been in the actual I code before that, and it always gets fought. But we keep hearing that they're making changes and they're making it better, and so I would imagine at some point it'll be an option and it'll get heard again in Las Vegas. So those are the majority of the big changes that you're going to see, you know, blower doors and different ways of writing the code and different options. Those are the majority of the changes. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. You know, I always get surprised when we go to the public comment hearing and things get heard again, and you think you know what's going in the code, then it all goes out to online vote, and you get surprised sometimes. So it's important to be involved in the process as we go, and I appreciate your time. I look forward to questions.
Great, thank you, Shaunna. And like she said, if you've got questions on the commercial energy code, or if you've still got residential questions, please go ahead and send those in. I got a couple questions, one on the commercial, so I'll start there. And it goes back to the slide you had before, Shaunna, about controlled receptacles. Is the intent of that proposal to help reduce vampire loads?
Yeah, it's the first time really plug loads have ever come into the IECC. They've been in ASHRAE, but they've never been into the IECC. So it's the first time we're going to start dealing with those plug loads and just saying, okay, things that are plugged in are using energy too. Let's shut off those outlets when we can. The arguments are always there about, oh, you're going to cause hazards because of daisy chaining and all of this. People are going to find ways around it. And that argument lasted for a good couple code cycles to this year.
Wow. All right. Okay, so I wanted to get to a couple questions that were sent in from Tom, and they really are more about the residential code, but I still think, I mean, there's one here that I think could apply to both residential and commercial from the standpoint of the multifamily. You know, when multifamily starts to get pretty big. So I will throw it to both of you. And the first question he has is, what are the barriers to zero energy ready home requirements in future codes? So I'm going to start with Jim, take it from the residential, almost like the single family duplex type perspective, and then Shaunna, if you could weigh in a little bit on some of the larger multifamily projects.
Okay, so I think that I believe the question dealt with the DOE's Zero Energy Ready Home program.
What are the barriers to zero energy ready home requirements?
Okay, the barriers to zero energy ready home requirements. So from an envelope perspective, the building is pretty much there. Some of the barriers are you have to, and I'm thinking zero energy ready home program. I'm thinking you have to do you have to be water sense. You have to do your indoor air quality requirements. Those are some barriers. I'm not hearing many barriers with panel capacity or anything with solar or anything like that. I've heard some panel capacity questions with EVs, but not with solar. And I believe that, and then of course having the resources and the industry locally available that can support the construction of those type of homes.
Okay. And Shaunna, if you could touch on a little bit from the larger multifamily projects.
Sure. So usually, if you know, the biggest argument is cost. You know, what is to get to zero energy? It's cost. And you have to do so much, and the code is supposed to be, you know, be a minimum. And, so that's one thing that we hear from one side. And the other is so many requirements up front. What do I do? You know, I have to do a blower door. I have to build a really tight building. And I have to add renewables. And how do I get there? You know, you can hear the arguments against it all day, but it's usually about cost. Sometimes the things that I've been hearing lately is usually about the renewables. In order to get to there, you're going to have to do renewables. And so it usually is based around the requirements of solar and leasing versus buying and RECs, and how do we deal with all of that, and does it have to be on-site or off-site, and just those arguments about the renewables is usually the biggest roadblock. Maybe some utilities treat them differently, or maybe my jurisdiction doesn't allow battery storage, or the code hasn't really dealt with battery storage in depth yet, so how do we do with that? So that's usually what I find to be the biggest roadblock, is dealing with the renewables.
Okay. You know, I want to add a question in here before I get to Tom's second question. It was one I kind of had on my mind. I'm going to ask both of you to kind of open up your crystal balls and kind of look into the future. And Jim, I may have asked you this question on a previous webinar, or maybe it was Shaunna, or maybe it was both of you. But you know, the model code is one that is can be used anywhere in the U.S., but it's also intended to be a guide. You know, that the local or state jurisdictions they retain the ability to amend and change things or adopt certain appendixes, but not others. They retain that flexibility. And so they can kind of make it what they want, but and why I say that is because you get quite a spectrum out there across the U.S. You know, you've got one end where we're going to zero energy, and then you've got others that, oh, we just adopted an energy code for the first time a couple years ago. So you've got quite a spectrum out there. But if you can look into your crystal balls, when do you think the model energy code will get to a point where it will be a net zero code?
That's a good question. Well, you know, I say the train's moving down the track, and in some cases we see it. Solar continues to move down the track, and I know there's been questions about with solar whether it's owned or PPA or leased and so forth. But solar costs continue to come down. There's a fixed cost that are not moving as quickly as the cost of the solar panels. The other piece that's moving quickly is the EVs. I think by the time this code is released, and we have all those manufacturers that I mentioned are releasing their electric vehicles, I think there's going to be a push for that. And then I think what's happening now also, municipalities are showing their interest and concern about the climate, and they're setting in place goals to reduce carbon and looking at more and more electrification. So that would lead to renewables, that would lead to electric power and so forth. So I think we're 6 years out by the time the 2024, 2027.
Somewhere in that cycle is when you think we'll get close to it, or we'll get to the point where those kind of proposals will be showing up, not just as an appendix, but as in the actual code.
Right.
Shaunna?
Yeah, I think that 2021 is actually probably shocked me more than any other code, in that we are actually on that path. It's always the intent clearly changed from being the base minimum worst you could do and ever get away with to a path to net zero. And so the proposals are starting to come in, and I think that's definitely the way it will go. I don't know how many code cycles it'll take, but the builders are speaking that they need something to keep them on a level playing field for those people that are trying to do it right. And the designers have spoken, and code officials maybe not as much as their sustainability departments. But yeah, I think the 2021 is the first step.
Okay. Going away from the forecasts for a minute, I want to get back to Tom's second question, which is, what is the marginal cost for EV-ready charging in new homes? Do either of you have a sense on that?
That information was part of, I don't have it off the top of my head, but was part of the proposals and that were submitted. Now, if he's talking single family, here I'm reside in the Denver metro area. Denver adopted a requirement with their 2015 IECC adoption a couple of years back, and it's so you either wire or you provide conduit, and so the builders are all putting in conduit, and I'm hearing on the level of up to $100 for conduit. Yeah. And
Shaunna, did you have any insight on that question at all?
I do not. I don't know the per unit cost. It's in both the commercial and the residential proposals. If you read them, it's in the reason statement. They have to provide cost analysis when you submit a proposal. You always have to provide cost. So it's in that, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. I wanted to make a final call for questions. We are here at the top of the hour, so I wanted to make sure to put that final call for questions, again, for either residential or commercial energy code. We have both Jim and Shaunna with us, They were both on their respective co-development committees, so these are excellent people to be talking to and asking questions of. I'm gonna start with Shaunna's answer on this, and then we'll move to Jim's answer. The question comes in from Kathy. What is your reaction to code proposals that exceed Energy Star guidelines for windows, and why do you feel that way?
Well, that's a great question. So initially, my first response is, this is supposed to be. You can always do better than the code, but you can't do worse. And there's certain windows. It depends on the Energy Star version. Hopefully, the most recent. But I guess my biggest thing is making sure that if you're getting the cost, if the cost outweighs the benefit. There's so much analysis on these windows. None of that gets decided lightly. None of it. It's amazing how much talk you can have about a U factor, just one U factor. But so I don't take them lightly. I do weigh in the cost. Whether or not they go past Energy Star isn't necessarily how I hold it. I hold it to, is the U factor the right for the climate zone and the right for the cost, and is it available on the market for people to buy, or do they have to special order them? I'm coming at it from a code official type of point of view. Is it doable? Is it enforceable? Can you buy it without breaking the bank or special ordering something and still get the great benefit? Maybe in climate zone 7 or 8, U factor is really hugely more important than it is in 1 or 2, where solar heat gain is way more important. So I look at all the different aspects of it.
Yeah. So, and I'll follow up. So yes, I agree with what Shaunna said. I was surprised. Thank you, Kathy. I believe it was Kathy who asked that question about windows. And because yes, when I was on the committee, I was surprised to hear the discussion where there were code change proposals that could exceed Energy Star new windows requirements. And I for one thought Energy Star was there to transform the market. The market would then catch up to Energy Star, and Energy Star would then move again and move the market again. So I was really fascinated to sit there and hear the discussions saying you can't go beyond Energy Star, which I don't agree with. I did when I was working in Arizona last year, supporting some local code adoptions. I did some informal studies where I went into big box stores and building supply houses to see what windows were on their shelves, what builders asking the questions, what are builders installing on homes, and then going and looking at some homes with the NFRC label still on the windows. They were exceeding code, and they were in many cases exceeding Energy Star. They were already there. They're already building that way. And so I believe that Energy Star is there to transition the market, not to limit the market.
Right, but also at the code hearings, I remember the conversation being that maybe in this case, the code would spur Energy Star to change because it was so easy to meet.
Yes.
Well, and that was actually going to be my comment as someone who has been to a handful of code hearings and testified. I was going to weigh in on this simply from the standpoint of, I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I thought that Energy Star guidelines were supposed to react to either the code or the market or something. It wasn't that we were tethered to Energy Star guidelines and we had to go below or less than them.
Right, I agree. Yeah, well, the code could go anywhere. There was that discussion. The code could go way, when I say below, solar heat gain numbers, lower U factor numbers, could go lower. They're not tied to Energy Star. But that was a big discussion at least on the residential committee. This is Energy Star, code can't exceed Energy Star, and I just don't have that opinion. I think Energy Star is there. The government's put a lot of money in to support the industry in advancing efficiency in fenestration, and not just to limit the market, but to continue to expand that market.
Well, I mean, look, if the code goes beyond where Energy Star guidelines currently are, then what's the reaction, right? Energy Star adjusts their guidelines. Isn't that how it would work?
Exactly. If Energy Star
exactly.
has to adjust their guidelines, or they wouldn't be considered an above code. You know, a lot of times people consider, well, I can go above code using Energy Star, and well, if Energy Star doesn't exceed code, then they wouldn't have that status anymore. So they will definitely react.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up and start by thanking both Shaunna and Jim for sharing their time with us today, and certainly their knowledge and their insight on this very timely and important topic. I really appreciate you both joining us today.
Thanks.
Yep, and I also want to thank our audience for attending and asking all those wonderful questions. I have one question that came in that I will convey to our guests privately, because it's really something that that could be applicable to a future presentation. And then I also want to thank NV Energy for their generous sponsorship today. Now, we're going to see you all back here next week. That's right, we're coming back next week, and we're going to turn everything upside down. First of all, the webinar is going to take place on Friday, which is something we hardly ever do, but it's going to take place on Friday, August the 2nd. It's also going to start at 1 p.m. Eastern, which is an hour earlier than usual. Our guest will be Tom Halford of Samsung, and he'll be making his first appearance. And the biggest news of all, Ron Jones is making a return to the webinar series. That's right, he's going to host next week's webinar. So you won't want to miss. These two industry leaders explore the explosive tech trends that are driving dramatic change in the construction and design sectors. So I hope you'll all join us in 10 days. And until then, have a drink on me tomorrow on National Tequila Day. Take care. Bye-bye.